Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the dead zones for the first Descendant. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox Series X. I actually tested this and recorded a video for it during the beta, but unfortunately deleted those files when clearing up some clips for curve tests, so that was a bit of a bummer. But quite a few changes have occurred since then. So just after release, they added, or at least during the beta, the dead zones were axial, so for the movement, and camera dead zones were 20% axial dead zones, and the cursor dead zone was a 20% radial. After release, they added dead zone options, which ranged from 20 to 40, so they weren't particularly useful. But later, they increased the range from 0 to 99 and changed the dead zone shapes for the movement and camera to radial, so all the dead zones are radial now. And when working on this video, they made another update to increase the sensitivity cap to double what it was. So we're going to be looking at that right now. So for movement, by default, we have a 20% radial dead zone. And we have full diagonal movement, so if we say align crosshair to about the middle of this, you can see that when moving just around the horizontal axis, we can see that the character is moving diagonally. So the angles are being applied appropriately, so your character movement is accurate to your stick movement. There is a smooth gradient between your slowest movement speeds and your fastest, in this case, sort of jogging speed. This shaded region represents the sprint threshold, and in this game you toggle your sprint. So if I click the stick, it's toggled now, and then when you pass this threshold, you'll start sprinting. And this is sort of just a modifier for the range. You still have a gradient within it, so we're sprinting, but if we push the stick further, you can see that it moves into a fuller sprint. It sort of looks like there's a bit of a jump, but that could just be the field of view slightly widening. It doesn't seem like there's a huge transition in movement speed. And there, when looking at these this more horizontal movements for this threshold, you can see the animation change significantly. However, the actual movement doesn't change too dramatically. The shape of this threshold is sort of rounded, but this is actually an axial dead zone, so a perfectly flat threshold, but it's being warped by the radial dead zone. This is set up by setting up a radial dead zone and then using those scaled output values, specifically the vertical one, and applying a flat threshold there. And because the radial dead zone is or just because the radial dead zone warps the values, so for example just moving past the dead zone gets you 0% vertically. However, over here just get 0% vertically here. That inconsistency warps the threshold, and we'll see that more when I demonstrate the minimum dead zone size. But for the camera, we have the same dead zone size and shape, so 20% radial. And same full diagonal movement, so I can just bob right around this vertical axis, and you can see that's being reflected in the crosshair movement. And if we cap the view like this, we can very easily see that when passing over this horizontal axis, that the direction flips. So we have full and correct diagonal movement for the camera. Before changing the dead zones, there is a dead zone for the radial wheel, And this doesn't change with the in-game dead zone slider options. So this is a static 30% radial dead zone. And the blue and green regions just represent the selection ranges, and as you can see, these perfectly line up with what you see on the wheel, and you have a nice indicator of which direction you're pointing the stick anyway. So this wheel is very nicely set up and is perfectly accurate in breaking the stick into 8 directions. For the menu cursor, this has the same dead zone and is controlled by the left stick dead zone. Of course, the sprint threshold doesn't apply here, but you can see here that it's a 20% radial dead zone, just like movement. And you have full diagonal movement. So if we put it to an edge like this, you can see the direction flip right across the axis. One aspect to this is the curve for the cursor dead zone is linear, but it's not scaled to the dead zone. So if you're using a dead zone, it's cropping off that much of it. So in this case, when you just exit the dead zone, you're moving at 20% of your total speed. So larger dead zones will make the smallest speed you can access faster. So that's just something to be aware of if you're playing at faster cursor sensitivities. But you can see that these were the defaults. If we raise these to, oops, there we go, to the max, you can see, well, you just saw right there that this increases the mini cursor dead zone, but of course also your movement dead zone to be a 99% radial dead zone. So at this point, the sprint threshold is almost perfectly circular. Of course, you can't really see it on the graph. The threshold's too thin to demonstrate, but you can see that at least the vertical threshold is the same. But along the lines, it would be almost perfectly circular if I could demonstrate in between the dead zone and the sprint threshold. The camera is also 99%, which you can see here. So this is accurate and of course maintains the full diagonal movement, though it's so large to not really be particularly useful. But to look at the opposite extreme, you can see here that since the left stick dead zone controls the cursor, now pretty much any movement creates cursor movement, and the right stick controls the sliding menu. Pretty much any movement can create movement either way. So depending on how much your stick leans, this will be can be kind of obnoxious. Whoops, I didn't change the graphs. There we go. But you can see there's actually, at 0, there's still a 1% radial dead zone being applied. So there's actually no difference in the options between 0 and 1% dead zones. The curve still seems to be scaled to that remaining 1% dead zone. But you can see that basically with any movement, you get both character movement and camera movement. And we still have full diagonal movement in either case. And here the sprint threshold is very obviously almost completely flat. It is slightly curved because of that remaining 1% dead zone, but you can see how this threshold changes with the radial dead zone size. Now, just so I'm not wobbling all over the place, oops, I'll change this back to its default. Yeah, it's a little awkward. And change the graph. So for the acceleration curve, we have a linear curve. So it's scaled to the 1% dead zone, and then just builds up linearly till your maximum turn speed. And this appears to be perfectly set up radially, or at least the maximum caps are expected. So if you move the stick diagonally perfectly, you should get about 70% of your horizontal speed, and that appears to be what we get. So this implementation is exactly what you'd want. The sensitivity, by default this is 50, but between the aiming and the normal sensitivity, these are actually the same. So you can see that I have them both at 100 right now. So this is the normal sensitivity. If we aim down, this is the same sensitivity. And the vertical sensitivity is the same as the horizontal. The one thing I've noticed, I don't know if there's multiple scopes in this game, but the scope sensitivity is half of the aiming sensitivity. $100 used to be the previous maximum, but they've upped it to 200, and 100 actually defaulted to about 225 degrees per second, so that was kind of pretty slow. This was the the maximum speed you can get before. It's brisk but not particularly fast. But now the maximum is 450 degrees, which is pretty quick. So for reference, if others have played it, say like Titanfall 2's maximum sensitivity without any of the extra turn speed was 500 degrees per second. So it's pretty comparable to that. So this is a pretty decent maximum sensitivity cap. And since both these are accurate currently, the aim sensitivity would be exactly half of, for non-scoped weapons, would be exactly half of this. What's interesting about this slider is that you can see that at one sensitivity it's extremely slow, and at one sensitivity this actually moves at 2.25 degrees per second. And if this slider actually did go to a perfect zero, you'd get zero turn speed. So these aren't really too much arbitrary values. This is a sort of a direct mapping of that. So at your minimum sensitivity, you get 2.25 degrees per second. At the default 50, you get 112.5 degrees per second, and at the current 200, you get 450 degrees per second. So, I mean, overall, I think these controls are pretty decent. For aim assist, this has pretty standard aim assist implementations. You have your normal slowdown, so when your cursor passes over an enemy, it will slow down over them. As far as I can tell, the camera auto rotate level controls the hipfire tracking, and the auto tracking level is the same option when aiming down sights. Maybe I can be corrected on that. But in all cases, the aim assist is relatively subtle. in this game compared to others. For example, this game is sort of based around the Destiny kind of gameplay formula, and comparing it there, this game has much less aim assist in comparison, though the sort of general strokes of it are the implementation with tracking and slowdown are the same. But we do have options for the specific amount you want, even if the maximums are still pretty low. So, as I mentioned at the start, there were quite a few changes since the beta, and really most of my criticisms of the controls then have been fixed. So we have Radial Deadzones, we have Deadzone options, so and originally the slower sensitivity cap has been doubled, so now that's not a problem. The only thing I think that could be added now is an option to control the acceleration curve. Many players like linear curves, but some may find them a little too sensitive. I'm in that boat, and I think having a curve to control the intensity of the acceleration curve would be helpful. So I'd like to see a slider ranging from linear, the current default, up to cubic with a decent amount of granularity, and that should cover every potential preference between players. So as you can see here, I'm just moving the stick around, and just to demonstrate the general speed you get with a linear curve at, oops, let me see, I'm pretty sure I'm playing at 100. So this is equating to 225 degrees per second, so a little brisk. But if we say change this to a quadratic curve, which I'm doing through a separate script, you can see that the same movements are much smaller. And with a slider, you'd be able to control the intensity of this. So this just makes small adjustments more easy. And if we say max this out with a quadratic curve, you can see that I can still make small adjustments easily, but with a faster maximum. So having a curve option would allow players to do that. One important thing would be for any curve option to be applied, or any curve to be applied per magnitude or by magnitude rather than per axis. As I mentioned with the sprint threshold, this is being applied per axis, just how far you're moving vertically. But when you apply curves that way, it can have an effect on your diagonal sensitivity. Normally it makes your diagonal sensitivity slower, as well as greatly skew your diagonal movement. If you apply a higher exponential degree curve, it slows down the movement off the axes, so that while there is still diagonal movement, it's much slower than it should be. So just applying this by magnitude would be the improvement, would be the way to do it. But otherwise, I think the controls in this game are very good, and it's quite refreshing to see that and see it improved this quickly, basically after launch. I don't know how many people have been requesting these changes, but it's nice to see the developers have made these changes really before I get a video out on it. But yeah, that's about it. So yeah, thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.